To say the storied life of Henry Kissinger is complex and multifaceted would be an understatement. He was a Jewish refugee who fled Nazi Germany with his family in 1938 and later excelled academically in the United States, graduating summa cum laude from Harvard College in 1950. Kissinger played a significant role in U.S. foreign policy from 1969 to 1977, pioneering détente with the Soviet Union, opening relations with the People's Republic of China, engaging in shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East to end the Yom Kippur War, and negotiating the Paris Peace Accords, which ended American involvement in the Vietnam War. Kissinger's legacy, however, is a subject of intense debate in American politics. He is widely regarded by scholars as an effective Secretary of State, but is also criticized for his support of a pragmatic approach to politics called realpolitik, which led to turning a blind eye to war crimes committed by American allies. For his actions in negotiating a ceasefire in Vietnam, Kissinger received the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize, a decision that was surrounded by controversy. Indeed, critics accuse Kissinger of exacerbating the Vietnam conflict and committing war crimes. They point to the secret bombings in Cambodia and Laos and the prolongation of the war in pursuit of an honorable peace that cost countless lives. This perspective paints a starkly different picture, framing Kissinger as a man whose actions led to immense suffering and destabilization in Southeast Asia. This overview confirms that Henry Kissinger's story cannot fall into the simplified narratives often presented by the left and right political spectrum. In this episode, join us as we delve into the war crimes of the Vietnam War and the debate around Henry Kissinger being a potential war criminal. And as always, be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell for our daily uploads. The Cambodian bombing campaign, initiated under the direction of Henry Kissinger during the Nixon administration, stands as one of the most controversial and pivotal episodes in the history of American foreign policy. Delving into the origins of this military strategy, the campaign, known as Operation Menu, was deeply rooted in the geopolitical context of the Vietnam War and the Cambodian Civil War. The United States, seeking to disrupt the sanctuaries and base areas utilized by the People's Army of Vietnam and the Viet Cong in Cambodia, embarked on a mission that significantly escalated U.S. military involvement in Southeast Asia. This approach reflected a broader strategy aimed at countering communist forces, a pivotal aspect of the Cold War's ideological and military battles. The decision to employ B-52 Stratofortress bombers for extensive carpet bombing in Cambodia marked a significant shift in the intensity and scope of the conflict. Initiated by President Nixon and strategically masterminded by Kissinger, the campaign represented a stark departure from previous tactics. It was intertwined with the U.S. policy of Vietnamization, which sought to decrease American ground troop involvement while maintaining military pressure through aerial assaults and support for South Vietnamese forces. Kissinger's central role in shaping this policy cannot be understated. As the chief architect of U.S. foreign policy during this period, his strategic vision was driven by a belief in the necessity of showcasing American resolve and military capability. This belief was part of the larger madman theory, where Nixon and Kissinger aimed to project the United States as a power capable of unexpected and extreme military action, thereby compelling adversaries, particularly North Vietnam, to yield to American demands. The legal and moral implications of the Cambodian bombing campaign are substantial and complex. Conducting the operation covertly, the Nixon administration effectively bypassed the constitutional requirement for congressional approval for acts of war. This circumvention of domestic law, coupled with the contravention of international norms, notably the Geneva Accords, which recognized Cambodia's neutral status, has led many to question the legality of the campaign. The moral aspect is equally contentious, with significant civilian casualties and widespread destruction in Cambodia raising profound ethical concerns. The impact of the bombing on Cambodian society was profound and far-reaching. The disruption of rural life, the resultant political instability, and the social upheaval are seen by some historians as factors that inadvertently strengthened the Khmer Rouge. This radical communist movement capitalized on the chaos and anti-American sentiment fostered by the bombings, eventually rising to power and committing horrific atrocities. The role of the US bombing in this tragic trajectory remains a point of significant debate and reflection. Historical and contemporary perspectives on Kissinger's responsibility in the Cambodian bombing vary widely. Discussions often revolve around the strategic justification of the operation, its ethical and legal ramifications, and its long-term consequences for Southeast Asia. Defenders of Kissinger point to the strategic imperatives of the Cold War era, arguing for the necessity of the bombings in that context. Critics, however, emphasize the human cost, the violation of international law, and the undermining of Cambodian sovereignty as reasons to consider these actions as war crimes. The My Lai massacre, a catastrophic war crime executed by United States Army personnel on March 16, 1968, during the Vietnam War, represents one of the darkest episodes in military history. Charlie Company, part of Task Force Barker, was deployed in Vietnam with an operation aimed at the Viet Cong 48th Battalion. Misinformation led to the belief that this battalion was harboring in the Sun Mai area. The subsequent military strategy involved aggressive engagement, destruction of property, and disregard for civilian lives. On the day of the massacre, soldiers, misinformed that only Viet Cong or sympathizers would be present, engaged in indiscriminate killing upon encountering villagers. Commanding officers, including Lieutenant Calley, ordered and participated in the mass execution of civilians. The US military's designation of the area as a free fire zone further exacerbated the situation, leading to unrestrained use of firepower. The massacre occurred in the hamlets of Son Mai village in Quang Ngai province, designated on US maps as My Lai and My Khe, and colloquially referred to as Pinkville by US forces. The initial code name for the incident was Pinkville Massacre, later changed in media to Massacre at Song Mai, before settling on My Lai Massacre in the US and Son Mai Massacre in Vietnam. The incident involved the systematic execution of unarmed civilians, numbering between 347 and 504 in the Son Tin district of South Vietnam. The perpetrators, soldiers from Charlie Company, targeted a vulnerable population comprising men, women, children, and infants. The brutality extended to the gang rape of women, mutilation of bodies, and even sexual assault against minors. The revelation of this massacre in November 1969 incited global condemnation and intensified domestic opposition to the US involvement in the Vietnam War. The massacre's aftermath was marked by a concerted effort to conceal the events. Initial reports falsely claimed a significant number of Viet Cong casualties, dismissing civilian deaths as collateral. It wasn't until whistleblowers like Ronald Ridenour, who wrote to Congress about the incident, and investigative journalists like Seymour Hersh, that the truth about My Lai came to light. Subsequent trials and investigations into My Lai painted a grim picture of systemic failure at multiple command levels. While Lieutenant Calley faced conviction, many viewed him as a scapegoat for broader systemic issues within the military command and strategy in Vietnam. The trials and reports, particularly the Peers Commission, highlighted the extent of the cover-up and the failure of the military establishment to address such atrocities adequately. 3 US servicemen who initially attempted to halt the massacre and protect civilians faced initial ostracism and were later honored 3 decades later by the US Army for their actions in safeguarding non-combatants. In analyzing Kissinger's role, it cannot be concluded he was directly responsible for this war crime. Indeed, his role was more about managing and attempting to resolve the broader conflict rather than being involved in specific military actions or decisions, such as those that led to the My Lai massacre. The responsibility for the massacre lies primarily with the individuals and commanders on the ground who carried out and oversaw the operation, and the military chain of command that failed to prevent or adequately respond to the atrocity. The cover-up attempts also involved various levels of the military hierarchy, but not specifically Kissenger. Agent Orange, developed in the late 1940s in the United States, was a tactical herbicide comprising a mixture of two herbicides, 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D. Initially used in industrial agriculture and for managing undergrowth along railroads and power lines, its most notorious application was during the Vietnam War under Operation Ranch Hand from 1961 to 1971 as part of the US military's broader herbicidal warfare program. Over this period, the US military deployed over 20 million gallons of Agent Orange, produced by 9 chemical companies, including Dow Chemical Company and Monsanto Company. The development of Agent Orange can be traced back to World War I, with the United States and the United Kingdom spearheading the creation of such herbicides. During the Vietnam War, Agent Orange was dispersed via helicopters, airplanes, trucks, boats, and backpack sprayers, targeting not just forests, but also food crops. This widespread spraying resulted in the defoliation of over 3.1 million hectares of forest, leading to significant ecological disruption and a reduction in animal species diversity. The environmental impact was so severe that it was labeled as an ecocide by notable figures including Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme and various academics. A critical component of Agent Orange was TCDD, the most toxic dioxin, classified as a human carcinogen by the US Environmental Protection Agency. TCDD's fat-soluble properties led to its bioaccumulation in the food chain, causing serious health issues for those exposed and their descendants, including various cancers and birth defects. The Vietnamese government reported that up to 4 million of its citizens were exposed to Agent Orange, with as many as 3 million suffering from illnesses related to the exposure. The Vietnamese Red Cross estimated that up to 1 million people have disabilities or health issues because of Agent Orange. The US government has expressed skepticism over these figures, but does recognize the link between the herbicide and several diseases in US military veterans. This widespread impact led to various legal actions, including the ratification of United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3172 and the Environmental Modification Convention. Affected US and Vietnamese veterans filed lawsuits seeking compensation for damages. The toxicity of TCDD, manifesting in cancers and birth defects among exposed populations, eventually led to the phasing out of Agent Orange. Its use was suspended in 1970, with a complete stop to defoliation and crop destruction operations by June 30, 1971. However, the legacy of Agent Orange persisted, with dioxin contamination remaining in the environment, especially in former US air bases, thereby continuing to pose health risks. The US government's initial response to the health implications for Vietnam veterans was to deny disability claims unless they could be directly linked to service. Over time, the Department of Veterans Affairs acknowledged certain conditions associated with Agent Orange exposure. The National Academy of Medicine, formerly the Institute of Medicine, conducted periodic reviews of the health effects of Agent Orange, confirming its association with several cancers and other health conditions. Critically, the policy to use Agent Orange was made under the presidencies of Dwight D. Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy, before Kissinger took office. Thus, while Kissenger was involved in many controversial decisions during the Vietnam War, he was not directly responsible for the initiation or implementation of the use of Agent Orange.